Hello and welcome. I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people, the traditional owners of the land from which this webinar is being broadcast, and the traditional custodians of the country throughout we are being broadcast throughout Australia, and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to the elders past and present and extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So thank you. So welcome now. I always start slowly because I don't have any notes and I talk off the cuff. So here we go. Firstly, let me say, hope all the technology works. Just as a hint for you before we get going, my suggestion is that you open up Teams to full screen. You'll get a better vision of everything. You might open up your chat screen or the Q&A screen, which will come up on the right-hand side, and that will just give you the ability to ask questions. You're welcome to ask questions throughout, but I'll answer them at the end. There's a couple of participatory components of this. You'll be asked to do it using a QR code, which I'm sure most of you are pretty aware of given COVID and where we've been. We've found that the mobile phone is the easiest way to participate with that. So this is the one presentation where you're going to be given the opportunity to keep your phones on. At the end, I'll take questions. At the end, I'll take questions. There will also be the opportunity to click on a QR code and leave a comment or two, and also to go into the draw for the 3-day masterclass. I would really appreciate it if you could leave a comment, though, about the format and about whether this is engaging or not. This is the first time we've used this approach. Normally it's a talking head in front of a computer screen, pressing PowerPoint slides, and to be honest, I don't find it particularly engaging, so we're going to be a bit more excitable. And they've given me toys to play with. So watch this. If I blank the screen, you can see all the people who are sitting behind us. Look, wave in the reflection, and how this was all set up with the technology. And I know Dylan, who's running the show, is really fearful that something's going to go wrong with the tech, which is absolutely fine. So let me get onto this a little bit. Now, clearly, I'm going to tell you every session around here, every chance I get, that you should sign up for the 3-day masterclass. So let's get that out of the way. I actually think it's a really, really good program, and I've been through a lot of them, and I used to deliver that program in different sections. So we used to have one called an Insight into Industry and one about negotiations and one about contract management, but we've actually put it all together. So I think it's a great program, and I've been doing this for a long time, but who the heck am I? Now they let me loose on the PowerPoint slides, and look at what I played with. So they shouldn't let me loose. Normally I get somebody to introduce me because I find it all a bit embarrassing, but for those who don't know me, I've spent 20-something years in the Army, and I say something, and I did every Army things, jumped out of aeroplanes and walked in the bush a lot, and I also ran some major projects and was sent overseas and dealt with a whole lot of technology. And then I left 1 year and I joined a consulting firm about 20-something years ago. And I learned an enormous amount, and I was well mentored around consulting. And then I found myself as a general manager in a range of businesses, including, one of the world's largest multinationals running a business across Asia and Japan. And when I say large, that company turned over $114 billion the year I left, and I ran a $600 million business, and I wasn't even a decimal point. I learned a lot in that business, but I actually didn't enjoy working in it very much, which is one of the reasons why I started Kiah. I also worked for investor-funded startups, and they've got a different set of behaviours, and I've worked for new businesses that are pulling themselves up. And then a few years ago, I said, let's stop being an important person in my spare bedroom. So I took an office, hired some people to be my friends, and Kiah stands before you today. And we run from Brisbane to Adelaide, and mostly we help the public sector and focus on the public sector doing better business and delivering better public services. So that's who I am, and that's where I'm coming from. Don't forget the pitch: commercial acumen for the public sector, chance to enter in the end. Mostly the program, though, and the commercial acumen program that we talk about is really about perspectives. And this is a great saying, because one of the things I learned when I was a mediator was that if I understand your perspective, my perspective changes forever. And this isn't about agreement or changing the way you do things, or even giving up and moving to the dark side. It is about understanding how they operate and industry operates for two reasons. One is you can use the way they do things to your own advantage inside your business. It's not everything inside the commercial business should apply to the public sector, but some of it should. Some of it's very useful because that's why they run businesses and they get better outcomes and they do things faster. So understanding how they think about things for your own benefit to do it internally. And the other is if you understand how they act and the choices they make and where they go, you can engage with industry to get the better outcomes you want from industry. And we'll talk a little bit about that in this session today. So this is mostly about perspectives. I think there's just three things you need to know, and this is a constant theme. The first is, how do I create value? And you create value by the way you engage, the way you design your programs, the way you design with the way industry works, and about using the things that industry does to your better advantage. So this is about creating value, and this is really day one of the program. The second day is about claiming the value, and we'll talk about negotiation and persuasion and influence and how to build the contracts and so on. And so once you've created the value, you've got to get it. By the way, people talk about negotiations, they talk about win-win. I'm not a big fan of win-win because it suggests that we all should win equally. We don't have to win equally. We've got to get the value that we want, and we talk about how to do that. And the third leg on this stool on the third day is really about keeping the value. So if you've created and you've claimed it and you've got this, how do I manage it and keep it? So throughout service delivery. And notice I start to talk about service delivery rather than around contract management or contract administration, because I think it's the superset of contract management. And we explore that in quite a bit of detail throughout the program. So let me race on because I'm going to cover those three things very, very briefly today. Whoops. Okay. I'm sort of going to start in the middle, really, and I'm going to talk about perspectives on tendering because it brings out a whole bunch of lessons. But the first thing about tendering is you understand that you're engaging with industry. Now, here's the thing about industry. Industry is not homogeneous. 97.5% of industry is small business. That's less than 20 people. So we've got these really mammoth companies at the top end, multinationals and whatever. They might be listed as Australian companies, but they really are multinationals, and they run to the strategy of the multinational. They're driven by international events, international strategies. I work for a company that said one day, we're not going to deliver public services anymore. I thought that was pretty cool because I worked in the vertical called public services, so I sort of saw the writing on the wall. But the issue for them was it wasn't a good value business in a global multinational strategic view. That's got no effect on us. The other side of it was they spent $5 billion on R&D in a year, $5 billion. And if we lost that into the public sector, that's a huge loss of intellect and power and resource that we were no longer getting. So at this top end, you get these influences that you've got really no control over. And then at the bottom end, you've got small companies that are working very, very hard to pay their GST and to pay their, cash flow is king at the bottom end because they don't have huge resources. Almost every business manager I've ever met, including me, too late, my wife's going to find out now, mortgaged their house to pay salaries because cash flow was killing you. And as you pull your bootstraps up, you've got to move through that journey. So behaving and engaging with the industry in these two different means, in these two different ends of the spectrum, these different sets of behaviours and thinkings if you're going to buy from them. So we'll explore that in the program. And the structure varies. Everything from sole trader to investor-funded companies to partnerships, joint ventures, and we pull these apart in the program because every one of them changes the way they interact with you because their issues and interests are all slightly different and driven differently. So we'll pull all of that apart. And I'm going to tell you really quickly, it's hard work running a business. And it's really hard work running a smaller business or a medium-sized business because you've got to do all of these things every day. And every one of them's got to get balanced. And if you've got a big business that's a multinational and has got thousands and thousands of people, you do one of these things or part of one of these things. If you're even in our business at 60 odd people or so, they're not odd people, they're good people, but 60 people or so, all of these things have got to get done by everybody at some stage. It is really hard work, particularly in that sort of small to medium business and enterprise. And if you understand that perspective, you might understand why you hear some of their frustrations and some of their concerns when they're engaging with you. So I go to that perspective issue. There are some very, very special cases in here. There's the monopoly business. That is, there's one person selling one product and you can only get it from them. And there's a whole range of those, particularly, I mean, defense sector is full of it, of course. There's the monopsony environment or business environment, and that's where there's one buyer. We're going to use defense as the example, of course, because defense companies only work to defense. And so that's a bit of a challenge because it really influences the way that industry behaves. But it's also fair to say that because of the buying power of the public sector, whether you be in Queensland or South Australia or federal government or aged care or whatever, because of the buying power, you have huge influences, monopsony-like, over the way the industry behaves. And then you've got these oligopolies, which is not a monopoly, but a small number of dominant sellers. The IT industry is a bit like this. ERP systems are like this. Take it or leave it. There's 3 of them or 4 of them, and you buy it the way they offer it, and you haven't got a lot of choice. So how do those industries behave, and how do they? We explore all of that in the program so that you understand how that works. Okay. So technology is going to let me down. I don't know what's going on in here. I was going to use a QR code, but I'm going to do what's the purpose of tendering? It's okay. I'll answer it for you. As a buyer, tendering is pretty much about competition. How do I approach the market? How do I get the market to give me an offer? How do I do it in a way that's valuable to everybody? How do I do it in a way that gives everybody an opportunity? So tendering is about value for money, and competition, of course, is key. And no one's going to argue that competition is key. But let me ask you a different question. What's the purpose of tendering as a vendor? And my guess is that people will look at, well, it's to win the contract. It's to win the deal. I'm going to nuance that a little bit, and I suspect that most people haven't got that quite right. If you're a vendor, the purpose of tendering is to get to the negotiating table, which is not quite the same as winning the deal, because to them, the deal isn't won until you actually sign the contract. And you've got a whole lot section in there, which is about negotiating. So you want to get to it in the right frame to negotiate the right things. The real purpose of tendering is to score high, to get the biggest score you can so that you're at the negotiating table. Now, just put that perspective hat on. What do you think that does to change the way they write their tenders? And how does that way that write their tenders now look to you when you're evaluating tenders, if the purpose is to score high? And how do you pull that apart? So with those things, you know, we're not going to explore today, but we certainly explore them in the 3-day program about how to do that. By the way we explore it, just so you know, people get immersed as a business development manager in a fake company. And they have to do a number of things. One is work out how they're going to get paid, because they're all incented on incented salaries, and change the individual behaviours of people. And then they work out then how they're going to put together a tender response and what that looks like in order to respond to a tender that's been put out by a fake government department. So that's how we run this program for 3 days. And so you get to see it from the vendor side. Score high. So I'm going to talk about tendering just a bit, because I said you need to take some things home that will be of value to you. So we pull this apart. Now, this is the typical tendering process, right? You write an RFT for some, you spend a month or a year writing a complex document, put 100 to 1,000 pages out in the market, and largely don't engage with industry. This is how it works. I mean, I know we let them ask questions, but from an industry perspective, asking questions is a bit of a worry, because if you know enough to ask the question, you're giving away the IP to everybody else, because we insist on telling everybody what the question was. If they don't know enough to ask the question, then they probably shouldn't be at the table. So one of the things that goes through industry mind in here is, should I even ask a question? Which is not good for us if we're a buyer, because we actually want to engage with them. Probity people are fearful, and it's actually, you know, we explore that question in a different way. Then we get our tenders in, and they're mixed. They don't line up, right? So we've got the RFPs gone out, and then we've got this response, and we go, oh, we don't understand that, or that doesn't answer the question, or you haven't answered the question, so we ask clarification questions. Now, remember, the answer to a clarification question by industry isn't to answer your question. It's a strategic issue about how do I score high? And that's not necessarily the same thing as giving you the right answer. It's giving you the answer that will give you the most points. Different issue, right? So how do you pull that apart and think about that? And then, of course, on the public sector side, we go through the traditional process, we've clarified it, we've determined now which offer is best value for money, and we down select and we tell, we want to enter into negotiations with you, everybody else you're on the back burner if negotiations fail. Here's clue number one, the champagne corks pop, because almost no one is going to go back to the minister or to the senior executive and say, we couldn't close the deal, we made a bad choice at down selection and we want to go to number two. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it doesn't happen a lot. So champagne corks pop and the power moves to the vendor because no one wants to lose face. And so they're now in the position of negotiating in a frame that was powerful for them to negotiate the best deal. I ask a question, if value for money is driven by competition, why do we cut the competition down early? Okay, so quick question for you is, if you want a good deal, you have to design for success. If you do not know how your business runs, if you don't know where the interfaces are and how things operate, and some of these diagrams come from live examples of contracts that we've renegotiated, and the one on the right-hand side with all those squiggly lines, every work order was touched 16 times by a public servant. Every work order. Here's the other clue is, 90% of work orders were under $900. I mean, that's a lot of process, but nobody knew what that process was until we mapped it. And then we understood the costs that were going into the business and the loss of value. You've got to design this process for success before you go into tendering. This is a bit of a longer read, and it's kind of like one of the case studies that we would talk about on the program. In this instance, a department was engaging a freight company as part of their supply chain to transport goods on demand to all points around Australia. And they had two priorities. There was a priority one, which was 24 hours, and priority two was 72 hours. Now, the reality is, if you've looked at the industry, they actually don't work 24-hour delivery. They work next day delivery if you deliver it on a cutoff time. So if you get the goods to Star Trek by 3 p.m, they will get it to the next major population centre, and there's a dozen of them, so it's not everywhere, the next major population centre by close of business the next day. That's not 24-hour delivery, that's a different definition. And so the company worked out in this process that about 30% of their deliveries would fail the 24-hour delivery process. And they knew that there was a penalty being applied. I don't use penalties because the lawyers would get upset, but there was a penalty being applied of about 20% discount on the fee if they failed on delivery. Do the maths on that, that's about 7% across all deliveries. The consequence of asking the question this way was the industry increased its price on every delivery by 7%. To cover the cost of the fail, right? It then added margin to the 7%, and so you just keep paying more. The point of going this is, we'll explore some things like this in the program to understand, if you want to get best value out of industry, it's better to align with industry and to understand how to get the value out of the industry that's there, rather than telling industry what it is that you want. And if you go down through the tendering process and you ask them what they want, and their job is to score high, they're going to tell you exactly what you want to hear, not necessarily tell you how to do the best deal or do the best contracting. So we kind of list out on all of those things. This is about what I talk about on different perspectives about how to do things in different ways. Okay, here's a pinch of commercial acumen that I got when I was a young guy. You need two people to run a business, an accountant and a lawyer, but never let either of them run your business. The senior CEO said that to me when I was a young chap just out of the army in the commercial world. And he wasn't saying that accountants and lawyers are incapable of running businesses. They are clearly able to do that as long as they don't behave like accountants and lawyers. Accountants count the money. In the public sector, they tell you how much you're spending and how to reduce your spend and how not to waste money and how not to do those things. None of which, by the way, are actually about your outcome, which is to spend money to deliver a social outcome. So they're actually not there not to be heard, but they're also not actually driving a better business outcome for you, which is your outcomes. And a lawyer's sitting there telling you, don't make any commitments, put all the responsibility on the company, drive all of the risks over to them, don't commit to anything. And by the way, if it goes wrong, here's how we're going to deal with it, because here's all of the things that are in the contract that we need to put in place to make things go wrong. Not one of those things is about making a contract go right. And yet what you want is things to go right. So we pull that apart. I don't pick on accountants and lawyers, but if you're owning the business inside the public sector, if you're owning the outcome, then you've got to own the outcome. And so many of the things that are said to us and so many of the constraints around procurement and engagement and contract design and engagement with industry is run by accountants and lawyers because we don't know how to be powerful enough to have a different conversation with them, like how does that add value to the outcome? So that's how we do this business. Okay, I was going to do this. Watch this. This is hugely technically challenging. I got a pen. One of the things I'm going to give you, how am I going for time? I've got 20 minutes to go. Awesome. Here we go. I'm over on this slide because playing with the technology. People often ask me, what does a person cost, or what's a contractor or a consultant cost? So I'm going to give you a clue on how to do this. I'm going to do it live. So what's a charge out rate? What's a reasonable price for a consultant? And why do they cost so much, the rotters? If their salary, how am I going? Whoops, go up a bit. Look at that. If their salary is $200,000, and believe me, there's a lot of people out here who think they need $200,000, and some of them are sitting in the room in here. So I have to now negotiate. But I'm just using this because the numbers are easy, right? But actually, it's actually not an unreasonable salary these days for somebody who's experienced, have had 20 years in business and know their stuff. It's not actually an unreasonable salary. I've got to add super to that. And super's 10.5% today, but I'm going, isn't 10.5 going up? It doesn't matter. Well, I'll do 10% because the number's easy. So that would make it $220,000. And then I've got to have what we call it G&A or corporate expenses and so on. So this is insurance, accountants, long lunches for the boss, all those things that you need, office space, IT, all of those things. And I'm going to say 30%. So 30% on top of $220,000 is about $70,000, right? 74 or something. So this number has now gone to $290,000. So the cost of just having somebody in the office without doing anything is $290,000 on a $200,000 salary. And I want to make some profit. Now, this is the big debate. What profit should you make? I'm going to say 30%. Now, this is gross profit. And so the issue about profit is, just think about it. The 30 of profit goes to the tax office. They tax you 10%, 30%. So 10% of that goes to PRO. It's about 10% of that you need to keep inside your business to reinvest in new things, to deal with the growth that you've got, the ongoing cash flow and so on. So you can't distribute that. You've got to keep that inside your business. So about 10% of the gross profit gets distributed on a broad terms to the owners. That's not a big number, actually, when you think about it, but I'm just trying to give a bit of a reality check. So I'm using 30% because the sum's also good, because that's about another $100,000, bit under, on a third of this is about another $100,000, right? So this takes it up to about $390,000 or $380,000. And so someone who's on $200,000 a year has got to deliver $390,000 or $380,000 to the company in order to kind of keep their job, right? This is pretty simple. And we all know that there's 221 working days in a year, right? Well, let me tell you, that's not true. That's not true. I just had a gentleman here, because part of our corporate obligation, of course, is to support people, who's been 6 weeks on jury duty. And they're paid full salary while they're on duty. It's just part of life and part of the obligation. 221 days isn't quite right, because they can still, there's all the things you need to do, like training, investment, security briefings, all of the other things that just take time out of your business. So we run on 180 days, which I will tell you is utilization. Now, if I do 180 days, now my slides, here we go. If I do 180 days on here, I've got to divide that by 180, and that gives you about $2,000 a day for every working day return. There's a billing rate, and of which almost no one gets paid $2,000, because Nobody who's buying wants to pay $2,000 for a consultant. Things you've got to manage in here are, can't change this. I can change this number, which is about how much it costs to run the business. I can change this number, which is how much profit the business can make, but it's still return to investors, still only around 10%, so it's still not very high. And I can change this number, but I can't change it, you can. So the things that get you better value out of dealing with contractors are, can I make my contracts longer without a break? You know, I've got a contract in here. We know they're going to extend it and going to do more work, but the contracts come to an end, so we're not being paid, and they haven't signed a new one, which they've already said they're going to sign, but they haven't got the administration out of the way. So I've got a team sitting on the bench for 2 weeks waiting for them to sign a contract. 2 weeks, 14 days is a big slice of this 180 days. So you get better value by making that a higher number with continuity and without risk of break. So get your administration sorted out. People can do things on this number if they can see a long-term revenue stream in here. So don't annualize it, make it longer. And people can get more leverage out of this if the cost of doing business is less. They're the levers that you've got about driving better value for money out of consultants and contractors, just as an aside. And I kind of fun doing it with a pen. How am I going? Still got the right slides? All right, here we go. Get out of the way. So what else was I going to talk about? Oh, so we get into day 2, which is much more around how do I claim the deal. So that's all about design, but how do I claim the deal? And we talk about persuasion, influence, and negotiation, and there are sort of 3 things in here. Persuasion is really convincing someone to change their mind. I've got to tell you, it doesn't work very well for me at home. And even if I do convince my wife that we want to go and see Maverick Top Gun, it's coming with sort of a level of resistance, and I'm likely to be sidetracked along the way. But persuasion we use a lot of because it's how we convince people that our ideas are good, and we use a lot of it internally. And we talk about, even in the industry, we use a lot of it internally. So how do we persuade people that this is a good answer or a good thing? How do we write the paper better and smarter? And so we have a look at it a little bit, not a lot. We talk about influence, and influence is about how do we create power and pressure on people to change their mind. Behavioral economics is around this. They call it choice architectures, for example. So how do I put choices in front of people so that people make choices that, you know, altruistically are in their best interests, less altruistically are in my interests. So this is sort of the influence model that you can use in here, and it needs rapport and trust, and we talk about that. But there's a fine line between influence and manipulation. But we do spend a lot of time on negotiation. Now, this isn't a negotiations course. We do run a masterclass on negotiation, but we give enough for people to be able to walk into the room and understand the principles of it and have some experience of doing a negotiation in the program. There is, if you really want to do negotiations and get bolted into negotiations because that's your focus, there are negotiation skills courses, and I know a company that runs a really good masterclass on that, just as a hint. But I think, in my view, is the commercial acumen program puts the negotiation in context, and it just becomes one more tool as part of the design of the program, negotiating a deal that makes sense and then learning how to do that. So we talk a bit about negotiations. We talk about negotiations in 3 ways, and this is strategy, engagement, and alignment. Strategy is knowing where you're going, what your boundaries are, and there's 1,000 books on strategy, but strategy is tiered. There's the grand strategy, and then there's the strategy down the next section and the next section. So we talk about strategy all the way to, I'm at the negotiating table and I've got 10 issues. What's my strategy for getting my way? And how my alignment is understanding people's issues and dealing with them. So it doesn't matter what you're negotiating, whether it be an interjurisdictional interjurisdictional deal, whether it be within your organisation or be it with external. Everybody's got issues and agendas and things that they want. It's kind of like stakeholder management, but on steroids, and really understanding the alignment of that. And engagement is how I'm going to do that. And we have a process that gives people influence and power, if you like, because they have a process and they can see how the process of engaging unfolds. And it starts with preparation, of course, and everybody knows that, but putting a proposal on the table. Here's how I would like it done. and you've got a proposal on the table through the tendering process, right? It's actually been given, you put one on the table, industry's responded to it, and you've got a difference in it. So we would say go through the loop now, explore it. Explore every one of these issues about why they're different, and then adapt. Don't argue, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm right, you're wrong. It is, how can I understand your issue and my issue, and how do we adapt so that both of those issues are properly addressed? Not necessarily agreement and not necessarily giving in. So strategy, engagement, and alignment are really the things that I've lost. I'm not on the screen anymore, that's no good. And I'll go back to this point of pondering. So much we're stuck in the view of tendering runs this process, RFT, response, clarify, down select, negotiate. The most common question I get, is a phone call that says we've been through evaluation, we've down selected to our preferred tenderer, and I've got 300 issues we need to negotiate. Can we get a workshop together to understand our position on the 300 issues? Now, I'm pretty sure that many of you will have read a book on negotiations, and you would have read, Getting the Yes, or watched the video, or whatever. And every one of them will have said to you, don't argue positions, understand why, and deal with issues. So negotiate issues, not positions. Yet the approach that we take is the definition of positional bargaining. What's my position, and how am I going to get my position across the table? Who says we've got to do it this way? Go back to my earlier comment. Don't follow the lawyers and accountants. Okay, and then we come back to the third issue in here is how do we keep the value? I've got 10 minutes to go, so shut up. Yeah, I got it. So you now need to listen faster. I'm going to talk more quickly. Is contract management, for example, worth the effort? Well, this is a study by McKinsey, and they said a few years ago, if you don't have a reasonable level of engagement, supplier collaboration, you're going to lose about 5% of your value. And if you do have a reasonable, you'll get an extra 5% of gain out of the contract that you've already got. So that variation is 10%. The reason I put this slide up is 10% worth it? Well, in Queensland, you spend about $10 billion in non-construction procurement in a year, about that number. If you take 10% of that, that's about 70,000 hospital stays, 700,000 emergency service visits, or my favourite, it's about 12 beers per Queenslander, which they keep telling me I've got to take off the slide, but I think there are good reasons for good contract management. This is another slide that says about 60% of the effort of building a contract is in writing the contract, and about 40% is spent in managing it. They also went on in this study and said, within about 18 months of an outsourced service, about 75% of the value you thought you were going to get in the contract dissipates. And you're back to square. 75% of the value. Pay attention. So here's some hints on paying attention. Here's the traditional contract management picture, right? So we've got a contracted service provider doing their thing. They've got an input. They're going to do some outputs. You're going to get delivered the outputs. They're going to report to you as the contract manager of the things that they're doing, and then you're going to control them by saying, you haven't done the things you said you'd do on time, so we're going to provide some penalties. We're going to pay you on time because you delivered the things you said you were going to do on time. I need to see drafts. Drafts haven't been done. We've got contract management meetings. So we've got this issue of real control structure, right? Contracted service provider, contract manager, control. Great story. Looks really good on a piece of paper, and it's very simple, and it's wrong. This was the picture that you're actually running, right? So you've actually got, this comes out of Porter's value chain for those who've done their MBAs, and there was a whole lot of work to convert that to consideration around the public sector. Porter, Harvard Business School, all about business, talks about margin and outcomes in the value chain, but the public sector version talks about outcomes, because that's what the public sector delivers. And you've got all of these components. The light coloured stuff is the corporate services that you need to run your business. And then all this other stuff are the activities, some of them internal and some of them external, some of them contracted and some of them delivered internally, that are all part of delivering an outcome. Here's a clue. You cannot contract out outcomes. You can contract for outputs from a supplier, but not outcomes. Outcomes are your responsibility. You deliver them. If it doesn't work, the minister's going to get it in the neck. It's going to hit the press and you're going to wear it. Outcomes are yours. You've got to make this chain of value work. So how do you make it work? You've got to understand the processes and the business that you're trying to get in, whether it be contracted or whether it be running internally. If you don't understand the process and how the process works, then you're not going to get the value out of it and understand the transformation that's going to occur as part of that value. But more importantly, you've got to look at both the input and the output, and what are the things that need to be done on the input to allow the service provider, contracted or otherwise, to be successful. The clue in here is mutual obligation. You have an obligation as the buyer to make sure they're set up for success. And when it comes out at the other end, you've got the obligation to take it and do whatever you need to do to turn it into the outcome. So integrating this process and understanding the boundary issues are things that we'll explore because they're key to success. And managing the boundaries, not the internal process, is what you need to do. That's how you keep the value. And everybody wants to talk about relationship and performance. Do we have performance-based contracts or relationship-based contracts? And there's a huge leaning about, margin being proportionally at risk, incentivizing or nudging, as one person says. You be careful that this doesn't generate the wrong behaviours, and we will explain about performance criteria and performance models, and we'll work some exercises about how they might generate inappropriate behaviours if you're on the vendor side. And then we can talk about relationships, of which there's not enough work done on relationships. We talk about strategic partnerships. So here's a clue. Partnerships occur because you're both tied at the hip for delivering the same outcome. Companies aren't linked to your outcome, they're linked to delivering an output in a contract. So they're not in a partnering relationship with you, but you can have partnering behaviours. And so what does that look like and how do you manage that? And it is more than an annual long lunch and a get together in a meeting room that says, oh, here's some performance criteria and away. You can do much, much better than that. And we'll explore some of that. There are ways to have active relationship management, and we pull that out in the commercial acumen to talk about here's how you could actually score relationships and really structure your conversations in ways that are meaningful to do the things that McKinsey and the other company were talking about driving value out of the relationship you've got, not just keeping what you've got, but getting the best value out of it that you can. So there's joint and active relationship management. And then, of course, everybody needs compliance. And you do with companies, you've got, are you doing what's in your contract, but are you complying with things like modern slavery rules, for example, economics? I have questions to answer. Okay. And I'm happy to go over time if you want to stay, by the way, but I'm going to finish up. I've got one slide to go, I think. The issue about compliance and management around these things is you've got to build closed loop systems. That is, this is what I want. Am I getting what I want? And there's got to be a feedback loop in there. People pay attention to the things that you're interested in. So if it's a compliance obligation that's in a contract, for example, and you pay no attention to it, nor will they, and you need reporting and audit, you just don't need to control everything. So you need to have oversight and pay attention to the things and divine performance, but you don't need to control the way they do things. And we'll explore all of those things in the program. So there's 40 minutes of me talking about how to create value, which is kind of day one in the program, how to claim value, and how to keep the value. They're the three things that are in the program. Now you've got some things you can ask questions, and you're welcome to, and I think I've got some I'm going to answer. Hang on a second. You can go straight to the website and register the Masterclass, and we'll take your credit card if you feel so wishing, and you can go in the draw for the free Masterclass for enrolment. Now, we actually do have the names of everybody who's been here to the end, so you don't need to do that because I'm a bit worried that that technology isn't actually working in there. So can you just make sure we grab the names of everybody who's here? But if you do want to talk to us or you do want to have a conversation, feel free to send us an email at academy@kiah.com. We'll be back at you. And if you're not sure, you've registered, we're probably going to get in contact with you anyway. So let me go. Questions?
So Jamie's asked, are there good and bad areas for government to outsource the industry? And why are we doing this? Asking the question, why are we doing this? Is that important?
Well, thanks, Jamie. Absolutely. I'm going to go back. I like the concept of Porter's value chain in the public sector sense. And you actually need to understand. I don't think you need to do a huge, multi-million-dollar consulting assignment. You can do it with a piece of paper in a day or two and just say, what are the components that fill up my business and where does it go? You've got to have that logic. And then you can outsource or contract in services. I think outsourcing is decide the name having a bad name. I think contracting in services and contracting in activity is what you want to do. And you've got to make sure that it's the valuable stuff to do. And if industry can do it better than you, do it with industry. One of the great things you have of doing with industry is that you do get levers that you often don't get in the public sector. Are you performing? Are you delivering? And those, but it's got to fit inside your business. And that spaghetti diagram, don't let that be your business because that won't work.
Got another one on the private chat. What's the one thing we can do right now to improve?
Well, you got to go to the commercial acumen for the public sector, of course, program. That would be one thing. I'm going to reiterate it, though. I'm going to do a couple of things for you. Firstly is know your business. And I mean that in every way. I mean, in defence, their procurement agency, CASG, has 10,000 policy documents, according to a review that was done a couple of years ago. 10,000. That's 2 policy documents per person. Nobody can know that business, and nobody can be successful in that business. But the other side of it is the Commonwealth procurement rules have 7 principles and comprise 30 pages. In Queensland, your procurement principles, I got the name of it, is 18 pages. In South Australia, it's 20-something pages. The 10,000 policies is someone's interpretation of them. So know your business and know what you can do. And every interpretation has been made somebody. You can help persuade and influence them to make a different interpretation if it delivers you value for money. So know your business is really my comment, is really know what you're doing.
And got one more. Sometimes we feel a bit overwhelmed working with private companies.
Yeah. There's probably a couple of things around that. One is they do tend to know their business better. I mean, in the public sector, again, there's a nice report out there that suggests that people, 80% of the people are looking for their next job. It's kind of, guys, the eye's not on the game. So one of them is, if you know your business, you will be in control. They can never know your business better than you. So knowing your business gives you power. Knowledge is power in that respect. But they do tend to have more authority and more ability to talk at the table, because they send people out who can talk at the table and do those things. So here's some hints around dealing with it. If you feel out of control, stop. Take a break. Just there's the most powerful word in negotiation is no or not yet. You don't have to agree to things that they say. You only have to agree to things that you want to. So if you're feeling out of control, seriously, just say, I need a break. We'll come back to it tomorrow, or no. That's your most powerful thing. Get yourself under control. Go and do the discovery that you need. Go and ask for some advice, and then come back to the table and get yourself. I mean, I do it all the time, and I've negotiated some big contracts. And when I feel like things are out of control and they're running all around me, I just go, I find some excuse, but I need a break. Just to break the momentum and to get a break. So that would be my suggestion is, if you feel out of control, take a break, come back to it with the tools you need to be in control. All right, am I done? Look, thank you very much for listening. If you've got any questions, if you'd like to know more information around the Commercial Acumen program, but there's one running in Brisbane in April, and the one that's advertised for running in Melbourne, we're actually going to do in Canberra, because we know that travel is a bit of a problem for people in Canberra, and we've got quite a bit of interest from people in Canberra. So if you're interested in that, just drop us a line and we will chase you up. So thank you very much. I'll just leave the screen up, and I'm muted.